Churches can be, should be, wonderful oases of grace and love, of places for where you can commune with God and you can have fellowship and friendship, close friendship with others. And I'd like to think that's what we've got going here, and I hope that's your experience. However, sometimes churches can be scary haunts of emotional abuse and brainwashing. Now that may be a shock to you, or it may not come as a surprise. So over the years, there have been stories in the media, and you've probably picked up on them, and not just in the media, things we've heard in our communities of various maybe questionable happenings in various organizations, especially religious organizations. Over the years, I have kind of studied Jehovah's Witness, and it kind of built right into their dogma is the idea that if someone strays from the fold, does not carry on with the rules and teachings of the Watchtower organization, that the rest, everybody else, is supposed to kind of turn their back and move away from them and isolate them. And call that what you will, shunning, disfellowshipping. It's very effective. I mean, because we are social creatures, and we need a group to be a part of, so that we find a lot of our joy from our friendships and those close relationships. So if that's your primary place where you experience healthy or at least joyful encouragement and such.
I need my sous chef, I'm sorry.
Oh, sous chef, he's got to go. Now it's two of them. To one little barbecue.
I'll watch it on Facebook.
And there's one down, one down. Yeah, so hopefully they'll be okay. So that's part and parcel of the organization. Remember, you may have heard a book some years ago, 40 Years a Watchtower Slave. This is somebody that got shunned and got excommunicated from the fold. And in many cases, it's very effective. People just can't stand that, and they're drawn back in afterwards. The Roman Catholic Church, the word that they used most often was excommunicating. So that was something that could happen to you in that stream. I think that's really toned down a lot in modern times, and most of the time that means that these days I think that you would not be allowed to share in the Mass. That's pretty much the extent of it. But there are all kinds of other strong degrees. You'll have heard of these things having to do with all kinds of different churches, whether they be Christian Protestant denominations, Baptists, Pentecostals, probably Lutherans and Presbyterians and Methodists. They've all had struggles in this area, and some strange things have happened over the years. Recently in the news, there was actually a church which some of you may have heard of. It's called Mars Hill. It's in Seattle. It's one of these big mega churches, thousands of associates or members, and the leader is a pastor, a very dynamic, charismatic guy named Mark Driscoll's written books. And so recently, a young fellow who was part of that, was very, very part of the whole experience, was in a small group. He had his duties every Sunday that he was involved with. He got engaged to one of the daughters of one of the elders of this church. And about 2 weeks before I think they were to be married, he cheated on her. But then he confessed this. He felt bad, and he repented. He confessed it, and to his small group at least, but the whole thing just went ballistic. I mean, he was sternly disciplined for this, and very widely publicized, and it was on the internet and all kinds of stuff. And so, this church has been under a lot of media scrutiny for what happened to him, and since then he's withdrawn from their whole group. So that's the kind of thing, they're working on it, but they're running into troubles. So you have to sign that when you become a member of that church, you have to sign that you will submit yourself to the discipline of the leaders of the church, for instance. So those are some pretty big questions out there. Christianity Today, which is a magazine I read a lot, it's kind of the biggest news magazine about things going on in churches in North America. I read this. An Oklahoma pastor spent 5 minutes of Sunday worship calling out parishioners by name for their flaws, including sleeping. Sleeping in church, yeah. What, more than 5 minutes? Yeah. Quote, "You're one of the sorriest church members I have. You're not worth 15 cents. Ouch, said Jim Stanridge, pastor of Skiatook's Emmanuel Baptist Church, to one attendee. Ouch, yeah. I mean, it's kind of funny, but it's kind of sad. I mean, it's scary, really. Because this is a true story. And it's not at all uncommon. It's quite common, this kind of thing happening. So a lot of these kinds of things, the whole idea of the practice of church discipline is derived, or it's thought to be derived, from the passage which Jacqueline read, that nice, sweet parable that's so easy to understand. And I'm not sure that it is. It's a tough one, and it's actually pretty straightforward, but it seems to get twisted and misconstrued in every which way that's possible. And it's this one, so I'm sure you all remember how it went, right? No. Didn't have Douglas here to have a conversation with about it. If your brother sins against you, go and show him his fault privately. If he will not listen, take one or two others. If not, they won't listen to them, take him to the church. Treat him as you would a pagan or a tax collector, right? So this is the text that is commonly used as the template for how we're to do church discipline. So I'm going to talk about that a bit, and I don't know that I've even ever preached about it. It's one of those passages you have to tread very carefully over. But first of all, let's look at the context of this passage. A lot of places where we just go astray is we don't take into account what was really going on when Jesus was teaching this teaching. And the context is the whole of chapter 18 of Matthew. So if you have a pew Bible, you might want to follow along a bit, because I'm going to zip through it a little bit. But Matthew 18, not all the chapters of the Bible are actually nice units, because the chapters and verses were added in hundreds and hundreds of years after the Bible was actually written. So somebody thought, I think there's a good place to divide it. In this case, they got it right, which is nice. So the beginning of chapter 18 has Jesus and the disciples saying, who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And Jesus, as you know, pulls out a little child. And he says, I tell you the truth, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So I think it's great that we're doing this on Kids Day, because Jesus is basically setting before us the ideal of the thing that he's out for and after and is producing in the world. And that's a bunch of little children, who are supposed to be you and me. So he says, we're supposed to get to become like little children. Now, I've said this before, I've preached this a lot, not childish, but childlike. In many senses, so the spontaneity, the genuineness, the honesty, the curiosity, all the good things that are wonderful about children that we beat out of them over the years. Jesus wants us to have it back. And he wants us to be ourselves again, which is pretty amazing. But there's an innocence about it, there's an unsulliedness about it. I mean, that's why forgiveness and healing and all those kinds of things that Jesus brings to our lives are so important, because they're meant to restore us, to take away all the pains and the harms and the wounds of the years and heal our souls. He restores my soul, right? Psalm 23. So then he goes on. So he's talking about little children, but he's also talking about all of us, all those who are followers of Jesus, because from God's perspective, we're his little ones. So he says, and whoever welcomes a little child like this in my name welcomes me. But if anyone causes one of these little ones who believe in me, now he's changed it a bit. The little ones are those who believe in him, to sin, it would be better for him to have a large millstone hung around his neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. Now, do you think Jesus is actually advocating that people tie millstones around people's necks, get them in a boat, take them out a couple miles offshore, dump them overboard? Probably not. I've mentioned this before. This is a style of speaking called hyperbole. Very common, especially in Jesus' day, in the Middle East, in the ancient world. as a way of colorfully making your point. And what his point is it's serious. If you are the cause of turning someone from the path, the cause of someone not walking with God, not living innocently, not staying clean or pure or holy, watch out. You will come to account for that. And God knows. So he says, so he's warning us all about how we treat each other, lest we cause one another to stumble. And he goes even further, woe to the world because of sin. If your hand or your foot causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. If your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. Do you think he really meant we should be cutting our limbs off and plucking our eyes out? Probably not. I've never heard anybody seriously claim that that's, say, oh, do you take the Bible literally? I got asked this last week at Burger, Beer, and Bible. Well, that's a tough question. Yes, I do, in the sense of I literally believe what it means, but I don't really think Jesus meant that I should cut my foot off if it causes me to sin. And it has. I've kicked people. So I've still got both my feet. So basically what Jesus is presenting here now is he's got his little children, and he's looking for them desperately to live holy lives. And don't get in the way of that. Don't cause people to mess up. Don't be their stumbling block. And the next, after that, is the parable of the lost sheep. How the shepherd leaves the 99 who are safe, and he goes out and searches for the one who is lost till he finds him, no matter what the cost. And we have a whole hymn based on that. There were 99 who safely lay. Which is kind of a story of the gospel. God in Christ has gone way far out of his way to rescue you, or rescue me. And the cross is the ultimate result of what it took for the good shepherd to get the sheep back. So we are precious to him, and our fellowship is precious to him. So this is about, if you will, so now he starts to get talking about the ecclesia, which we call the church. And the thing about the church that Jesus is after is that we be a fellowship. That we be people who know each other, love each other, care for each other, encourage each other, pray for each other, help each other, on and on and on. And the strength of the church lies in how strong those bonds are. And if they're going in the right direction, in other words, getting stronger and stronger as the years go by. It's not in how good the programs are and how good the music is and how wonderful the PowerPoints are and how great the preacher is. That's not the strength of the church. The strength of the church is the web of relationships that we share with one another. So that's why Jesus is really dead serious about this whole thing. So just before, then is the talk about if someone sins. And afterwards, there's a whole lot about forgiveness. There's a whole big chunk here about forgiveness, because that's huge in relationship. It's the one in this very chapter, Matthew 18, where Peter says, how many times should I forgive my brother? 7 times? And Jesus says, 70 times 7. And he tells a story about this guy who's forgiven like the national debt. And then he goes out and he finds his brother or his friend who owes him $20. And he shakes him down and pounds him out and throws him in jail till he pays up. And Jesus says, that's what it's like with us. God forgives us that much. It's like you've been forgiven the national debt. So watch it when you go around treating your neighbor and your brother and your sister and not forgiving them for the little things comparatively that they've done to you. Heavy stuff. Okay, so let's look at this passage. First, verse 15. He says, if your brother sins against you, go and show him his fault just between the two of you. If he listens to you, you have won your brother over. Now, there is a little bit of, the scholars have a little bit of a debate about the actual original text. Some of the ancient documents read, if your brother sins, and some read, if your brother sins against you. Probably the later edition was, if your brother sins against you. Now, those are two different things a little bit, right? There's one thing if somebody does something to you that is notably horrific or sinful, harmful. It's another thing if they just do something wrong and you know about it. However, if it's something that you're going to have a personal talk with them about, it suggests that it has something that has an impact on you and it has an impact on your relationship with each other. Okay? So this is between the two of you. So it could be something that for instance, you know about that your best friend did. Your best friend cheated on his wife, and you're the only one that knows. Your best friend stole from his company or his boss, and you somehow found out. See, if you don't say anything about that, he's drawing you into his web, if you will. You're an access. That's what they say in if you hear about a murder being planned, and you don't actually participate in it, but you don't do anything about it either, you're a what? An accessory, right? So there's an effect on you. So it is between you two, even if it wasn't specifically against you. But the point here is, your relationship has somehow been breached. And the whole thing that we're after is not to shame somebody, it's not to be better than somebody, but it's to restore the relationship. So Jesus says, if he listens to you, you have won your brother over. You've restored the relationship. And that is so sweet. Now, at this point, where to go? We have to be very careful about this sinning against us kind of thing. Because sometimes it's just something that somebody's done that's ticked us off, that's offended us, that's set us the wrong way. I don't know if that's ever happened to you. I do it to people all the time, apparently. And, it isn't that we mean to do it. It's just kind of where we're at. We're just not sensitive enough yet, or whatever. And we do things like that. So if you're thinking that someone's done something to you, maybe just slow down a bit and see if it's something that maybe you can endure. Remember love, 1 Corinthians 13, love bears all things, it endures all things, it lasts, it puts up with a lot. So a lot of things, and we are easily offended and put off. So is it something that can be, you can let go and realize that's that person. That's maybe their personality, or maybe just where they're at in life, or something they're going through, or maybe it's just they're on their journey and they'll pass through that, or maybe they won't. Something you can allow. But if it's not, if it's something that has wounded your relationship, is it not best to go and have a chat with them? So Jesus is telling us, don't go and talk about it with everybody else around. Heaven forbid that we would ever do that. Don't even tell them. Go and tell the person that you're dealing with about the thing. And have a conversation about it. And then you will win back, hopefully, your relationship. So that's step one. And step two is actually not a big step from that. Step two is get one or two others. So it remains quite private. The point here is to, as long as possible, as far as possible, to avoid shaming people. And you notice how in the church, so often it's got abused and misused, so people are kind of publicly shamed somehow by being shunned because they don't believe the right thing or something. So taking one or two others, it says, and every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. So he quotes here from the Mosaic law. That's how things were to be dealt with under Moses' law. But in this sense, Jesus is saying a lot. He's saying that there should be lots of consciences gathered around the issue. If it's not healing quickly, get a couple more consciences in there, because it might be you misunderstood each other. If you can imagine that ever happening. And so if there are a couple of other people in there, they might have more objectivity and say, you know what, you guys are actually saying the same thing. Just have different ways. I've found this to happen quite a bit. So that's step 2. And step 3 is, if he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the ecclesia. And if he refuses to listen to the ecclesia, the church, treat him as you would a pagan or a tax collector. So that's like the last, most drastic measure when all else has failed that you can go ahead with. Now, the church in Jesus' mind and the mind of Matthew in the first century was not like a big mega 1,000-people church. It was a very intimate gathering of people, an enclave of followers of Jesus, all of who were intimately connected with each other and knew each other. Paul has an example of this very thing in his letter to the Corinthians. So the very thing, Corinthians is one of those little churches, probably 100 or a couple of hundred people, we don't know, that had been formed new. All these people were new Christians. They'd come out of polytheism. Corinth was a city noted for cult prostitution. It was quite the place. Very colorful district, if you will. And so these Christians, Paul had planted the church, they gathered together, and they were seeking to be followers of Jesus. They'd all come out of, pretty much all come out of pagan backgrounds and that kind of stuff. And so they are kind of a little oasis in the midst of very hostile, dark territory. And Jesus is beginning this work of wonder in them. You can read the letters to the Corinthians. And in 1 Corinthians 5, Paul writes this: "It is actually reported that there is sexual immorality among you, and of a kind that does not occur even among pagans. A man has his father's wife, and you are proud. Shouldn't you rather have been filled with grief and have put out of your fellowship the man who did this?" So that is to be the attitude of when you take step 3. It's not supposed to be this guy, we're going to crush him, we're getting him out of here. I mean, it's a totally different, it's a humiliated, grief-stricken attitude of sorrow that this has to be done. In the second letter of Paul to the Corinthians, whether it's about the same story or not, we don't know. He tells them to restore the one. They've dealt out this punishment. Their hearts have been broken. They did this kind of disfellowshipping thing for a while. He says, you got to restore him, lest you ruin the guy. You got to bring him back in. So it's all to be done with a whole lot of grace, grief, and love if you're ever going to get this far and do this kind of stuff. So all this is about guarding our relationships. It's about restoring each other to health, to spiritual health, to a walk with God, to a walk with Christ, to holy living. That's all it's all about. And so it's for the good of all concerned. It's in order that we might create those wonderful oases of grace, of communion with God and with friendship. And I have seen it happen, well, at least step 1, where someone went privately and spoke with someone about something that had wounded them. And actually, I have done it. I've had that conversation. Not very often, because it scares me silly. But I've done it, and I've had it done to me, or with me, with good outcomes. So in other words, people say, oh man, you're right, I'm sorry. It's like they don't really get what they've done. Or I didn't get what I'd done. And I've got corrected. If we're going to be followers of Christ, I think we need to have a mindset that is prepared for someone to come along, because you don't know what you're doing that's kind of unconscious to you, just the way you've always been, and you can do something quite damaging sometimes to another person. And I have learned and grown through having needed to listen to somebody, but to hear something about myself that's hard to hear. And that's a good thing. It's one of the ways that God trains us and causes us to grow in grace, grow in His way. But so often, this whole thing is misunderstood, it's misused, and it's abused by people who have power or think they have power over other people. And so I have not really seen it, but effectively very well carried out steps 2 and steps 3. Although a little bit. Heard tell. So we need to be very, very careful, very, very gracious in practicing this. However, note that here's Jesus back in the ancient world 2,000 years ago teaching best practices for conflict resolution. Doesn't that blow you away? I mean, we don't like it. We don't want to deal with it, but it's just part of reality in a fallen, sinful world. And Christians are sinners. We still do things wrong. Just because we're redeemed and forgiven and changed, we're not complete. And, Jesus has set it out, and here it is. How else could you do it? Is there a better way? Has anybody come up with a better way since Jesus' time? It's simple. It takes guts. It takes courage, but it's effective. Where did he ever get such wisdom, do you suppose? And you note, even nowadays, the conflict resolution things are basically based on this principle. If you've got a business and somebody's getting out of hand, or they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing as part of your business, do you fire them? You're probably going to have problems with that these days. You go and have a chat with them. Somebody goes and has a chat with them one-on-one, probably the boss or a manager or a human resources person, and they explain it. And if they get a good result, then you don't have to worry about it anymore. If it doesn't such a good result, then maybe a small group of human resources people and a counselor are brought in, and we try again. So it's interestingly enough, a lot of that kind of stuff is based on or is parallel to the very things that Jesus taught 2,000 years ago. I think that's interesting. So right after this in the passage, in Matthew, there's a teaching by Jesus about prayer with a wonderful promise. He says, I tell you, if two of you on earth agree about anything you ask for, it will be done for you by my Father in heaven. For where two or three come together in my name, there am I with them. I use this verse quite a bit. I think this is a definition of the church. 2 or 3 gathered in Jesus' name. He says, if two of you agree about anything you ask for, it will be done for you by my Father in heaven. Wonderful promise for us to claim in praying. When we pray together, we agree on something that we're praying about. Now, do you suppose these two might be connected? This teaching on prayer and this teaching about discipline and holiness and keeping it pure. Do you suppose, eh? One right after the other. If we ever needed to pray for courage and for wisdom and for sensitivity and for objectivity and for grace for all concerned, it's when we're involved with correcting one another. As we so often go astray just in doing that. I don't think it's coincidence. I think they're together on purpose. So whatever we do, however we do it, needs to be accompanied with lots of prayer. So there's something for you to think about, I guess. Consider, restudy, argue about, that we might get along really well and our relationships might get stronger in the love of Christ. Shall we pray? Lord, we